They called her the Sledgehammer, and it was not a compliment. In the gleaming Armada of the United Terran Fleets, where ships were named after mythical heroes and celestial phenomena, the Icarus Wing, the Orion Spear, the Stardust Dream, the Sledgehammer was an ugly, brutalist truth. She had been born an asteroid cracker, a colossal mining vessel designed to pulverize planetoids for their mineral wealth. Her hull wasn't molded from sleek, radar-absorbent composites. It was a patchwork quilt of scarred, 10-meter-thick armor plates, bolted and welded together with a pragmatism that bordered on contempt for aesthetics. There were no graceful lines, no elegant nacelles. She was a flying brick, a monument to function over form, propelled by a trio of gargantuan fusion drives that burned with a dirty, inefficient rage, leaving a trail of radioactive particles that other ships' navigators cursed. When the fleet had been forced to press every available hull into service against the rising tide of pirate syndicates and separatist movements, the Sledgehammer had been recommissioned out of a desperate, almost comical necessity. They'd strapped a few turbo-laser batteries to her spine and installed a military-grade sensor suite that was constantly at war with the ship's own monstrous magnetic field. But it was like putting a tuxedo on a rock troll. She remained what she had always been: slow, loud, and built to break things. Her captain was Eva Rostova, a woman who seemed molded from the same forgotten era as her ship. She wasn't a product of the prestigious Fleet Academy. She was a former salvage operator, a veteran of the debris fields and corporate graveyards of the Outer Rim. Her record was a messy constellation of minor infractions, commendations for impossible salvage recoveries, and a single, heavily redacted incident that had ended her civilian career and pushed her into the fleet's reluctant embrace. Rostova was quiet, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a way of moving that was utterly economical, as if she were conserving energy for a crisis that was always just around the corner. She commanded not with shouted orders and inspiring speeches, but with a stillness that demanded attention. Her crew was a reflection of her own status, a collection of strays and misfits the fleet didn't know what else to do with. Her chief engineer, a man known only as Gears, was a grizzled veteran who spoke more to machines than to people, and believed that percussive maintenance was a legitimate diagnostic tool. Her helmsman, Jax, had been a hotshot racing pilot in the orbital slums of Titan until a disastrous, high-stakes race left him with a mountain of debt and a choice between a prison sentence and a fleet uniform. Her first officer, Lieutenant Ben Carter, was the sole exception, a crisp, by-the-book academy graduate assigned to the Sledgehammer as a clear punishment for some political misstep. His perpetual frown a testament to his shattered career ambitions. They were assigned to patrol Sector 9, the galactic equivalent of a forgotten back alley, a quiet stretch of void deemed too empty to be valuable and too stable to be dangerous. It was a milk run, a babysitting job for the ship and crew nobody wanted. While the celebrated carriers of the core fleets hunted pirates along the vibrant trade lanes, the Sledgehammer plodded through the silent dark, its powerful but unsophisticated sensors sweeping the emptiness for threats that never materialized. The first whispers of something wrong came not through official channels, but through the back doors of the interstellar net. The encrypted chatter of long-haul freighters and grizzled prospectors. A ship, the Stardust Dream, one of the fleet's finest long-range scouts, had missed its check-in. Then another, the heavy cruiser Leonidas, vanished from the tactical map while on patrol near the Kelvin Nebula. The official communiques from Fleet Command were sterile and reassuring navigational errors, sensor ghosts, communications malfunctions. Rostova, who had spent a decade listening to the lies of corporate dispatchers while her friends died in reactor breaches and hull collapses, recognized the hollow ring of a managed crisis. She saw the pattern they were trying to erase. The ships weren't just missing. They were disappearing without a trace. No distress calls, no wreckage fields, no lingering energy signatures. They were simply there one moment and gone the next, erased from the universe as cleanly as a line of code deleted from a datapad. Carter, ever the loyal officer, dismissed her concerns. "Captain, Fleet Command has the best intelligence in the galaxy. If there were a credible threat, we'd be the first to know." Rostova just stared at the star chart, her silence a heavier counterargument than any words. One cycle. Their tedious patrol was interrupted by a priority directive, a string of cold, impersonal code that rerouted them from their designated path. The battlecruiser Agamemnon, a titan of the fleet and the flagship of the 7th Flotilla, had gone silent. Its last known position was less than 2 parsecs away. Their orders were simple and chilling. Proceed to the coordinates. Observe and report. Do not engage. As the sledgehammer lumbered out of hyperspace, the void that greeted them was unnervingly perfect. The ship's sensors, designed to map the dense composition of asteroids, swept the area with a brutal broad-spectrum pulse. They found nothing. No drifting bodies, no twisted metal, no faint radiation from a dying core. The space where a 2-kilometer-long warship should have been was as empty as if it had never existed. "This is wrong," Jax murmured from the helm, his usual cocky swagger gone, replaced by a raw unease. Even if the core went critical, there'd be something. A smear of gas, frozen coolant, anything. Gear's voice crackled over the ship's internal comm, his tone rougher than usual. "The background radiation is too clean. Captain, it's lower than it should be. Like something scrubbed the area." It was then that the Agamemnon returned. It didn't emerge from hyperspace or decloak. It simply appeared. 1 second. The main view screen showed only the distant glitter of stars. The next. The battlecruiser was there, hanging in the void. A silent, gray leviathan. But it was wrong. All its lights were out. Its weapon ports were sealed. Its transponder, which should have been screaming its identity across all frequencies, was dead. It drifted with a slow, deliberate grace that was entirely at odds with the ship's design, like a predator conserving its strength. "Hail them," Carter snapped, his voice tight with protocol. "All channels, standard fleet greeting." The comms officer tried, his fingers flying across the console, but the result was only static. The ghost ship didn't respond. As it drew closer, the sophisticated systems on the sledgehammer began to rebel. Navigation displays flickered, showing their position shifting by thousands of kilometers a second. The targeting computer for the turbo lasers went offline, its diagnostic screen filling with corrupted, alien-looking symbols. Through the static of the open comms channel, a new sound began to surface, a soft, layered whispering, like countless voices speaking at once from a great distance. It was a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and settle directly in the mind, a chilling murmur that spoke of empty, cold places between the stars. "What is that?" Carter demanded, his composure finally cracking. "Is that a signal?" "No," Rostova said. her voice a low, steady anchor in the rising sea of panic. "It's a symptom." The Agamemnon opened fire, but there was no brilliant flash of plasma, no thundering roar of energy. From its cannons emerged silent, shimmering bolts of distortion, waves of ghostly energy that slipped through the sledgehammer's energy shields as if they weren't there. They struck the hull not with physical force, but with an insidious touch that attacked their technology. A wave of it washed over the bridge, and half the lights went out. The environmental controls flatlined, and the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending loose tools and data pads drifting into the air. The ship wasn't being destroyed, it was being possessed, dismantled from the inside out by an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't fight. Carter was shouting orders, calling for evasive maneuvers and shield recalibration standard tactics for a standard battle. All of them utterly useless. "Gears." Rostova's voice cut through the chaos, calm and absolute. "Bypass the main power regulators. I want a direct, unfiltered conduit from the primary fusion core to the cargo bay. Section 0. Manually." There was a pause on the other end of the comm. Then Gear's gruff voice returned, laced with disbelief. "Captain, you know what's in there. You can't be serious. Firing that thing. It's not just a war crime. It might crack our own core." It's deep in the belly of the ship, behind meters of lead shielding and hazard warnings so old they had faded to a pale yellow, lay Rostova's darkest secret, a piece of salvage from a forgotten war that she had never logged in any official manifest. It was a relic of humanity's most desperate and unethical era of weapons development, a device known only as the null spool. It wasn't a bomb. It was something far worse. The possessed Agamemnon was turning, bringing its main spinal lance to bear, the whispers in the static growing louder, promising a cold, silent eternity. The remaining systems on the sledgehammer were dying, the ship's digital soul being methodically erased. Rostova looked at Carter's terrified face, at Jax's white-knuckled grip on the helm, and made the only choice she had left. "Prepare to fire the spool on my mark," she commanded, her voice leaving no room for argument. "And pray it only takes them with it." The bridge of the sledgehammer became a chapel of controlled panic. Jax fought the helm, his knuckles white as bone as the ship's steering thrusters fired erratically, trying to obey a navigational computer that was babbling nonsense. Alarms blared, not with the clean, urgent tones of a military vessel, but with the grating, industrial klaxons of a mining rig, a sound designed to be heard over the roar of fracturing asteroids. Ben Carter was pale, his academy training a useless lexicon in the face of an enemy that defied every known principle of naval warfare. He stared at the approaching ghost ship, at the malevolent energy gathering in its spinal lance, and then at Rostova, his expression a mixture of terror and accusation. "Captain, what is a null spool?" he demanded, his voice thin. "What have you brought on this ship?" Rostova ignored him. Her focus narrowed to the internal comm channel, her connection to the heart of her ship. Gears. Status. Down in the cacophony of engineering, surrounded by shuddering pipes and conduits glowing a furious cherry red, Gears was wrestling with a thick, grease-stained lever set into a reinforced panel. The panel was unlabeled, a deliberate omission from any official schematic. "The bypass is open, Captain," he yelled over the shriek of protesting metal. "I'm rerouting the entire output of Core 2. The magnetic containment field is fluctuating. If we don't discharge in the next 30 seconds, it's going to collapse, and we'll be a brand new nebula. The lights on the bridge dimmed to a dull, emergency red as the ship's power was siphoned away, diverted from life support, from internal gravity, from every non-essential system. The sledgehammer groaned, a deep, structural complaint that vibrated up through the deck plates, the sound of an old body being pushed far beyond its limits. Cargo Bay 0 is charged, Rostova announced, her voice impossibly steady. Jax, hold us steady, whatever it takes. Jax gritted his teeth, his eyes glued to the view screen where the Agamemnon was now a monstrous silhouette, its weapon glowing with an unholy light. Steady is a strong word. Kappa, he grunted. But I'll give it a shot. On Rostova's command console, a single new icon had appeared, a black circle on a field of static. She placed her thumb over it. She remembered the day she'd found the spool, encased in a containment shell within the wreck of a Black Ops research vessel from the Separatist Wars, a ship whose very existence was denied by both sides. She had recognized its terrifying potential, not as a weapon of war, but as the ultimate salvage tool, a key to unlock any puzzle, to disassemble any obstacle. She had installed it herself, in secret, a final, desperate insurance policy against a universe that had never shown her any mercy. Fire, she said, and pressed the icon. There was no sound, no recoil. For a single, heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The lights on the bridge flickered and died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness, the only illumination coming from the spectral glow of the Agamemnon's charging cannon. And then, from the sledgehammer's forward cargo bay, a pulse of perfect nothingness expanded into the void. It wasn't light or energy, it was an absence, a wave of pure entropy, of informational decay. It washed over the Agamemnon, and the great ship simply ceased to cohere, the whispers in the static cut off, replaced by a profound and absolute silence that was more terrifying than the noise. The battlecruiser's spinal lance, moments from firing, dissolved into a cloud of incandescent particles, its energy no longer bound by the laws of magnetic containment. The armored hull lost its memory of strength, the plates peeling away from the frame like wet paper, drifting silently into space. The internal decks collapsed upon each other as the ship's structural integrity became a forgotten concept. Lights flickered across its surface in a final random spasm as its power conduits forgot the pathways of electricity. Within seconds, the pride of the 7th Flotilla was gone, replaced by a rapidly expanding cloud of inert, disorganized matter dust, frozen gas, and silent, dead metal. It hadn't exploded. It had been forgotten. The silence on the bridge of the sledgehammer was broken by a ragged, desperate gasp from Carter. "My God," he whispered, staring at the debris cloud. "What was that?" The emergency lights flickered back on, casting long, dancing shadows. A cascade of damage reports began to scroll across a secondary monitor. "We're adrift," Jax said, his voice a hollow echo. "Main drives are offline. The power surged from that thing. It fried the primary ignition system. Steering is shot, too." Gear's voice came over the comm, heavy with exhaustion and pain. "The core held, but just barely. We've got multiple plasma leaks in the aft conduits. I've got the whole section sealed, but we're venting radiation. The ship is dying, Captain." Rostova took a deep, shuddering breath. the adrenaline finally giving way to a bone-deep weariness. She looked at the cloud of wreckage on the screen. The ghost of a ghost. She had won. But the victory felt like a disease. Her secret was out. Her ship was crippled, and they were stranded in the middle of nowhere, stained by the use of a weapon that made turbo lasers look like children's toys. The true cost of her decision was just beginning to be calculated. Carter stumbled over to her console, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. That weapon, it's illegal. It's an ontologic. It violates every treaty. Every convention of civilized warfare command will have you executed. Command thinks we're on a milk run in Sector 9, Rostova countered, her voice hard as Durasteel. And right now, Command is losing its ships to an enemy it doesn't understand. We're the only ones who have seen what it is, and we're the only ones who have something that can stop it. Their argument was cut short by a new alert, a soft, insistent chime from the long-range sensor station. The officer monitoring it, a young ensign with wide, terrified eyes, turned to Rostova. "Captain, I'm picking up a signal. I don't know what it is. It's not fleet, not civilian." "Put it on screen," Rostova ordered. A single, razor-thin line of text appeared on the main view screen. It wasn't a language. It was more like a line of mathematical proof, a string of symbols that seemed to shift and writhe as they looked at it, hinting at geometries and concepts that the human mind was not meant to hold. And beneath it, a countdown had begun, starting from 10 minutes. "It's a response," Jax breathed. "We fired our big gun, and something answered." "It's not just an answer," Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the alien script. "It's a declaration. They know we're here. They know what we did." The countdown continued its silent, inexorable descent. They were a crippled ship with a spent superweapon, bleeding energy into the void, and something was coming for them. The choice was stark. They could try to repair the drives, limp back toward fleet space, and face a court-martial, hoping against hope that Command would believe their insane story. Or they could embrace their new reality. They were no longer fleet officers. They were pariahs, wielding a forbidden power against an unthinkable foe. "Gears," Rostova said into the comm. Her decision made. "Forget the main drive. I need a bypass. Route what's left of the auxiliary power directly to the hyperspace navigator. I don't care if you have to wire it with spit and prayer. Get it done." Carter stared at her, aghast. "Where are we going? We have to report this." "Report what?" Ben Rostova shot back, turning to face him fully. "That we destroyed a fleet battlecruiser with a weapon of mass erasure, that we've made contact with a species that communicates in cryptographic death sentences. They'll lock us in a dark room and lose the key. No, we're not running back. We're going forward." She pointed a trembling finger at the star chart, at the Kelvin Nebula, the last known position of the Leonidas. "Whatever this is, it's spreading. We just rang the dinner bell, and we're the main course. Our only chance is to learn what we're fighting." The countdown on the screen ticked past 8 minutes. In the silence of the bridge, the crew of the Sledgehammer looked at each other, the old hierarchies and regulations melting away, replaced by a single, terrifying certainty. They were alone. The fleet wasn't coming to save them. They had stepped outside the rules of the universe, and now the universe was coming to collect. The countdown on the main view screen was a merciless, silent metronome marking the final seconds of their existence. 6 minutes. 5. The cryptic line of alien mathematics above it seemed to mock them, a complex equation for their own demise. Down in engineering, the reality was far more visceral. Gears, his face slick with sweat and grime, was forcing a massive copper buzzbar into a junction box that sparked and spat like an angry animal. It was a crude, brutal act of mechanical surgery, bypassing dozens of safety protocols and delicate micro-relays to create a raw, direct channel from the ship's last dregs of power to the hyperspace navigation computer. It's not going to be a clean jump. Captain, he roared into his comm bead, the sound distorted by the electrical chaos around him. The nav computer is half corrupted. I'm basically pointing us at a star chart and kicking the engine. We could end up a light year from nowhere, or in the heart of a sun. A light year from nowhere is better than here. Gears. Rostova's voice replied, a thread of steel in the storm. On the bridge, Jax wrestled with a manual control yoke, trying to align the crippled ship. Alignment is a ghost. Cap, the best I can give you is a general direction. We are pointed roughly toward the nebula, but the margin for error is, well, it's the size of a solar system. Make it work, Rostova said simply. The countdown passed 2 minutes. The sense of an unseen, vast intelligence focusing on their position was a palpable pressure, a weight on the hull that was more real than any physical force. Carter, having accepted the futility of protocol, was now working with a desperate efficiency, running diagnostic after diagnostic on the sensor suite, trying to get a read on what was coming. I'm getting ripples, he said. His voice strained. Gravitational distortions. Something big is moving. It's not using a standard hyperlane. It's bending space around it. The countdown hit 30 seconds. Gears. Now. Rostova commanded. Engaging the bypass, Gears yelled back. He slammed the final connection into place. A tidal wave of raw energy, untamed and unfiltered, surged through the ship. The lights on the bridge didn't just flicker, they exploded in showers of sparks. The sledgehammer screamed, a violent, metallic shriek of a machine being tortured. The view screen went white as the hyperspace window tore itself open. Not with the elegant blue shimmer of a military drive, but with a jagged, bleeding wound in the fabric of space-time. The ship lurched forward, thrown into the chaotic tunnel of hyperspace like a stone from a catapult. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, the bridge was filled with the ghostly whispers they had heard from the Agamemnon, the sound of the enemy bleeding through the unstable rift. Then, with a final, bone-jarring shudder, they were through. Silence. The ship drifted in the inky black, engines dead, systems offline. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic hiss of the emergency life support. The jump had lasted less than a second, but it had aged the sledgehammer by a century. The view screen was a spiderweb of cracks, showing a field of stars they didn't recognize. They were lost. Damage report, Rostova said, her voice hoarse. Her command cut through the dazed quiet. Gears was the first to respond, his voice a weary rasp. The hyperspace drive is slag, completely melted down. We're not jumping anywhere else. The primary core is stable, but the power conduits are a mess. I can maybe get us impulse power, but it'll take time. We're a sitting duck. Carter, pushing himself up from the floor, ran a hand over his bleeding forehead. He looked at Rostova, his eyes no longer filled with accusation, but with a grim, dawning understanding. "We're alive," he stated, as if convincing himself. "That's more than the crew of the Agamemnon can say." "Captain, what was that thing, the spool?" Rostova leaned heavily against her console, the facade of a calm commander finally cracking to reveal the exhausted salvage operator beneath. "It's an ontological weapon," she said, her voice low. "From the Separatist Wars. The official name was the Metastability Cascade Field Generator. A weapon that doesn't destroy matter or energy, but the information that holds them together. It attacks the fundamental constants of a localized area. It makes reality forget." She looked at the faces on her bridge, drawn and scared in the dim red light. "I salvaged it from a wreck in the Hades cluster. I never intended to use it. I've learned that it's better to have a choice, even a terrible one, than to have none at all." A new respect, born of shared trauma, began to form in the space between them. They were no longer a fleet crew. They were survivors, co-conspirators in a cosmic crime. Jax, ever the pragmatist, managed to get a navigational fix from the backup star charts. "Well, the good news is, we're not in the heart of a sun," he announced with a weak attempt at a smile. "The bad news is, we're in the Stygian abyss, a dead sector famous for absolutely nothing. We overshot the Kelvin Nebula by nearly 500 light-years. The next several cycles were a blur of grueling, thankless work. Under Gear's direction, crew members crawled through cramped service tunnels, rerouting power cables by hand, patching plasma leaks with emergency sealant, and coaxing dead systems back to life with a combination of ingenuity and brute force. They scavenged parts from the ship's own mining equipment, turning laser drills into makeshift welding torches and seismic sensors into passive scanners. The Sledgehammer, a vessel already built on pragmatism, was being rebuilt by desperation. During this time, they began to speak of the enemy, giving it a name to hold on to in the dark. They called it the Silence, for that was its truest weapon, the way it erased ships, the static that replaced communication, the perfect, clean void it left in its wake. As they worked, Carter managed to restore the sensor logs from their encounter. He replayed the moment the null spool fired, analyzing the chaotic energy readings. "There's a residue," he explained to Rostova, pointing at a fluctuating wavelength on the screen. "When the spool fired, it left a scar, a brief echo in the quantum foam. I think that's what the Silence locked onto. It's not just tracking us. It's following the unique signature of its own undoing." Their only hope, they realized, was to get back to the Kelvin Nebula. If they were being hunted, their only chance was to become the hunters, to find the source of the Silence before it found them. It took 2 weeks of relentless labor, but Gears finally managed to get the main impulse drives online. They were weak, running at less than 30% of their normal output, but they were enough. The Sledgehammer began its slow, painful journey back across the void, a wounded beast crawling toward the lair of an even greater monster. Their arrival at the Kelvin Nebula was nothing like their violent entry into the Stygian abyss. They coasted in on minimal power, a ghost of a ship creeping through the swirling clouds of incandescent gas and dark matter. The nebula was a celestial masterpiece, a breathtaking vista of purples, crimsons, and golds. But its beauty was rendered sinister by what lay within. It was a graveyard. Dozens of ships drifted in the nebula's ethereal currents. They saw the sleek, arrow-like form of the Stardust Dream, the heavy, brutalist chassis of the Leonidas, and the unmistakable outlines of cargo haulers, mining vessels, and pirate cutters. All of them were dark, silent, and perfectly intact, like museum pieces arranged in the void. They were not wreckage, they were tombs. "They're all here," Jax whispered, his voice full of awe and horror. "Every ship that's gone missing for the last 6 months." Rostova scanned the silent fleet, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. "They're not just drifting," she observed. "There's a pattern. They're arranged in concentric circles, all facing inward." Her crew followed her gaze, their sensors focused on the center of the macabre formation. There, veiled by the thickest part of the nebula, was something else. It was colossal, far larger than any ship, an object of impossible geometry and obsidian blackness that seemed to drink the light of the surrounding gas clouds. It was a structure impossibly ancient and perfectly artificial, a lattice of crystalline spires and smooth, featureless planes that defied human design philosophy. It hummed with a power that made the sledgehammer's sensors scream, a silent, deep thrum that they could feel in their teeth. As they watched, a shimmering field of energy, the same ghostly distortion that Agamemnon had used, enveloped one of the smaller pirate vessels. The ship was slowly, inexorably drawn toward the central structure. It wasn't a tractor beam. It was something more fundamental, as if the space around the ship was being folded to bring it closer. "It's a processing station," Carter breathed, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "It's harvesting them. It takes control of the ships, brings them here, and then..." "What?" Before he could finish his question, they got their answer. The pirate ship touched the surface of the black monolith and was absorbed without a trace, its form dissolving into the structure's dark surface like a drop of ink in water. A moment later, a pulse of energy flared from the monolith, and a new ghost ship, a perfect, dark replica of the vessel it had just consumed, detached itself and took its place in the silent Armada. It wasn't just capturing ships. It was replicating them, building an army of ghosts. And then, the worst happened. A thin beam of light shot out from the central structure and struck the sledgehammer. There was no impact, no damage. Instead, the alien script from their first encounter burned itself onto their view screen, stark and white against the swirling colors of the nebula. This time, however, the message was different. It was shorter, more direct. It was a single, terrifying symbol, the black circle on a field of static, the icon for the null spool. It knew. The source of the silence knew what they were, what they carried, and it was looking right at them. The symbol burned on the view screen, an accusation and a death sentence rendered in the language of physics. The black circle of the null spool. The silence wasn't just aware of them. It recognized their weapon. It had felt the sting of its own non-existence and had traced the wound back to its source. On the bridge of the sledgehammer, the air grew thick and cold. Every eye was fixed on the monolithic structure at the heart of the nebula, the architect of this silent, growing armada of ghosts. "It's a trap," Jax stated, his voice flat. "It let us get this close. It wanted us here." He was right. The moment the symbol appeared, the ghost fleet began to move. Dozens of ships, from nimble scout vessels to massive battle cruisers, turned in perfect, silent unison. Their dead running lights flickered on, casting an eerie, cold glow across the swirling gas clouds. They began to advance on the sledgehammer, not with the chaotic fury of a human fleet, but with the slow, deliberate, and utterly coordinated patience of a spider sealing the exit to its web. They were being corralled, their path of retreat systematically cut off by a wall of stolen, weaponized tombs. "Carter, what are we looking at?" Rostova's voice was a low, urgent command. "Give me an analysis of that structure. Power source, composition, anything." Carter's fingers flew across his console, his face illuminated by the cascading data. "The energy readings are off the scale. Captain, it's not a fusion or antimatter reaction. It's drawing power from the nebula itself, from the quantum vacuum, maybe even from another dimension. The structure's composition is unknown, but it's resonating. It's broadcasting a signal, a carrier wave that's resonating with the technology on those ships, overriding their systems. It's like a universal rootkit for reality." "Can we break the signal?" "No," Carter said, shaking his head. "It's not something you can jam. It's woven into the laws of physics in this sector. We'd have to turn off gravity to stop it." The Ghost Fleet was closing in, a pincer movement of silent, deadly grace. The nearest ships, replicas of the Stardust Dream and the Leonidas, began to emit the shimmering waves of distortion, the ontological weapons that had crippled the Agamemnon. "Oh, gears." Rostova barked into the comm. "I need power, all of it. Divert everything from life support and artificial gravity to the shields. We need to buy time. The shields won't stop those waves." Cap Gear's voice shot back, filled with frustration. "They'll pass right through." "I know," Rostova said, her eyes narrowing as she studied the advancing enemy. "I'm not trying to stop them. I'm trying to overload them." It was a desperate gamble, a theory born from a salvage operator's instinct. If the Silence's weapon attacked information, then what would happen if you fed it an overwhelming storm of pure, chaotic energy? She was betting that the distortion waves weren't just a weapon, but a medium, a two-way street. The sledgehammer's shields, designed to deflect asteroids, were crude but incredibly powerful. She ordered Gears to pump every last watt of the ship's energy into them, not to create a stable barrier, but to generate a chaotic, unstable field of raw electromagnetic noise. The ship shuddered as its generators screamed under the strain. The hull plating began to glow a faint blue as the energy field saturated the metal. The first waves of distortion washed over them. Instead of passing through cleanly, they hit the chaotic energy field and sputtered. The effect was immediate and violent. On the ghost ships, lights flickered erratically. Their movements became jerky, their perfect formation faltering for the first time. "It's working," Jax yelled from the helm. "It's like we're giving them a seizure. It's feedback." Carter realized, his eyes wide with understanding. "We're corrupting their control signal by overloading our shields. We're sending a blast of informational static back up the beam." But it was a temporary reprieve, and it was costing them everything. The sledgehammer's power levels plummeted. "The generators are going to blow," Gears warned. "We can't keep this up for more than a minute." Rostova's mind raced. They had a defense, but no offense. They were trapped, their ship slowly tearing itself apart just to stay alive. And then she looked at the monolith, at the source. They couldn't fight the army, so they had to kill the general. Her gaze fell on the icon for the null spool. It was grayed out, inert. Firing it had nearly destroyed the ship. Recharging it seemed impossible. "Gears," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The spool. Can you recharge it?" There was a long, static-filled pause. "Captain, that's insane." Gears finally replied, "To get the power I'd need, I'd have to bypass the core's safety regulators and initiate a controlled collapse. It would be a one-way trip. Once I start the sequence, the reactor will go critical in less than 5 minutes. We'd get one shot, and then the sledgehammer would detonate with the force of a small supernova." The finality of his words hung in the air. It was a suicide mission. Sacrifice the ship and everyone on it for a single, desperate shot at the heart of the enemy. On the bridge, every face turned to Rostova. In their eyes, she saw fear, but also a sliver of defiant hope. They were a crew of outcasts, a ship of junk, pushed into a corner by an enemy that represented the ultimate, sterile order. Their entire existence was a testament to messy, chaotic, stubborn survival. "Give me an open channel," Rostova said to the comms officer. "Ship-wide." A soft chime indicated the channel was open. Her voice, calm and clear, echoed through every corridor and compartment of the dying ship. "This is Captain Rostova. You all know the situation we're in. We are outmatched and outgunned. The fleet isn't coming. There is no retreat. But we have a choice. Not a good one, but a choice. We can be erased by them, or we can go out on our own terms and take them with us." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Chief Engineer Gears is preparing to overload the reactor to power our final weapon. This will destroy the ship. Anyone who wishes to abandon ship, the escape pods are yours. No one will think less of you. You have 2 minutes." She cut the channel. The silence that followed was profound. Carter looked at her, his face grim but resolute. "No one's leaving, Captain," he said softly. Jax just gave a tight, determined nod. Not a single alarm sounded from the escape pod bays. The crew of the Sledgehammer had made their choice. "Gears," Rostova said, a lump forming in her throat. "Begin the sequence." "Aye, Captain." Gears replied, his voice filled with a strange, calm pride. "It's been an honor." The ship began to shake, a deep, terminal vibration. The lights on the bridge pulsed in time with a new, terrifying alarm, the unmistakable wail of an imminent reactor breach. On Rostova's console, the null spool icon began to fill with light, a black hole slowly drinking the ship's life force. The Ghost Fleet, sensing the immense power buildup, redoubled its attack. Their formation tightened, and the distortion waves intensified, but the Sledgehammer's chaotic shield held, flickering and sparking like a dying star. 1 minute to core breach, Jax called out. "The spool is at 90%. Get us as close as you can," Rostova ordered, her eyes locked on the black monolith. Jax pushed the failing impulse drives to their limit, piloting the shuddering, groaning ship on a collision course with the heart of the enemy Armada. They plowed through the ranks of the smaller ghost ships, their overloaded shields tearing the enemy vessels apart with raw energy feedback. "Spool is charged," Carter yelled over the crescendo of alarms. The Sledgehammer was now in the very center of the graveyard fleet, the colossal alien structure looming before them, a wall of impossible blackness. They could see the surface now, the way it shimmered and writhed, the way it seemed to absorb the very concept of light. They were out of time. The ship was coming apart around them, the hull groaning as the reactor threatened to tear a hole in reality. "This is for the Agamemnon," Rostova whispered, her thumb hovering over the black circle. "For the Leonidas, for every poor soul you erased." She fired. The pulse of the null spool, supercharged by the death throes of a collapsing fusion core, was a silent, incandescent wave of pure, weaponized chaos. It struck the monolith not as an explosion, but as a contagion. The perfect, ordered structure, the master of information, was hit with an idea it could not comprehend, the idea of its own impossibility. The black surface flickered, turning a milky gray. Cracks appeared, not in the structure itself, but in the reality it occupied. The carrier wave that controlled the Ghost Fleet collapsed. Across the nebula, 100 stolen ships suddenly went dead, their systems fried, their malevolent intelligence gone, leaving them once again as simple, empty tombs. The monolith began to unravel. It didn't break apart, it sublimated, turning from a solid concept into a whisper, its impossible geometry folding in on itself, its connection to this dimension severed. A psychic scream of pure, cold rage echoed through the minds of the crew on the bridge, a final, respiteful curse from a dying god of order. Then it was gone. In its place, there was only the beautiful and silent swirl of the Kelvin Nebula. On the bridge of the Sledgehammer, there was a single, shared breath of victory. It lasted for less than a second. "Core breach in 5, 4, 3. Jax counted down, his voice calm. Rostova closed her eyes, a faint, sad smile on her lips. They had done it. They had faced the silence and made it scream. And then the universe went white. The white was not a color. It was an absence of everything else. A total sensory deprivation that was neither hot nor cold, loud nor quiet. It was the sensation of non-being, the universe holding its breath. For Eva Rostova, it was a moment of profound, dreamless peace. She had accepted the end, and this was its sterile, silent embrace. But peace is a fleeting state. A pinprick of sensation returned first the cold. A deep, biting cold that seeped through her uniform, a cold that spoke of dead reactors and the absolute zero of the void. Then came the sound, a faint, high-pitched ringing in her ears, the protest of a nervous system coming back online. She opened her eyes. The bridge was dark, utterly black, save for the distant, indifferent light of the nebular gas filtering through the cracked view screen. The emergency lights were off. The cacophony of the core breach alarm was gone. There was only silence, a deep, tomb-like silence that was heavier and more final than any noise. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself up. The deck was littered with debris, but there was no fire, no melted bulkheads, no signs of the supernova that should have atomized them. "Jax," she croaked, her voice raw. A groan answered from the helm station. "Still here, Cap," Jax mumbled, his voice thick with disorientation. "I think my head feels like I used it to stop a freighter." One by one, the others began to stir. Carter was slumped over his console, a low moan escaping his lips. The comms officer was checking herself for injuries. They were all alive. It was impossible. It was a fact. "Gears," Rostova said into her personal comlink, her heart pounding with a terrifying, illogical hope. "Gears, report. Static answered for a long moment. Then the engineer's voice, weak but alive, crackled through. "Captain, I don't know how." The overload sequence completed. The core, it's just gone. The whole reactor chamber is a vacuum. It's not breached. It's empty. Cold as a grave. The crew spent the next hour in a state of dazed disbelief, taking stock of their impossible situation. The fusion core, the heart and soul of the sledgehammer, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a perfectly sealed, radiation-free cavern of empty space. They were on emergency battery power, a system with a life expectancy measured in days, not weeks. They were adrift in a celestial graveyard, the most haunted place in the known galaxy. It was Carter who finally pieced together a theory, his face pale in the glow of a portable work light as he gestured toward the cracked view screen. "The spool," he began, his voice a hushed whisper of scientific awe. "We thought of it as a weapon that fired outward. We were wrong. It's a field generator, a localized reality editor. When Gears overloaded the core, he didn't just give the spool enough power for one last shot. He saturated the entire ship in the energy it needed to work." He took a breath, trying to find the words. The core breach was an event, a piece of information hurtling toward a conclusion. The spool's final pulse, powered by that very event, didn't just hit the monolith. It hit us. It targeted the imminent, certain information of our own destruction, and erased it. It made reality forget we were supposed to die. Jax finished, the understanding dawning in his eyes. "At the cost of the reactor," Rostova added, completing the terrible equation. It didn't save the ship. It just unwrote the explosion and took the cause with it. They hadn't survived. They had been edited. They were a glitch in the fabric of space-time, a ship that should not exist, floating in a tomb of ships that had met their proper ends. Their victory was absolute, their predicament equally so. They were marooned. For 3 days, they conserved power, the silence of their dead ship broken only by the quiet conversations of the crew as they contemplated their strange afterlife. They watched the silent, beautiful dance of the nebula outside, a constant reminder of their isolation. On the 4th day, a new light appeared among the swirling colors. A ship. It was ugly. A cobbled-together vessel that made the sledgehammer look like a luxury yacht. It was a scavenger ship, a vulture of the void, drawn by the sudden, inexplicable silence from a region that had long been rumored to be a ship-eater. The scavenger hailed them on a broad, thus unencrypted frequency. The face that appeared on Rostova's auxiliary screen was that of an old woman with a web of wrinkles and eyes that had seen too many star charts. "This is Captain Maeve of the Rust Bucket," the woman said, her voice like gravel. "You folks in the old rock hauler are a long way from home. We've been monitoring this sector for months. Ships go in, they don't come out. Then, a few days ago, the whole place just went quiet. You got a story to tell." Rostova looked at the faces of her crew, her family of strays. She saw their exhaustion, but she also saw the hard-won clarity in their eyes. Their old lives, their fleet careers, their very identities had been burned away in the phantom fire of their reactor. They were no longer Lieutenant Carter, Pilot Jax, or Chief Engineer Gears. They were the crew who had stared into the silence and survived. "We do," Rostova replied to Maeve, a new kind of authority in her voice. "And we've got something better than a story. We've got a salvage claim." Maeve's initial disbelief turned to cautious interest, then to wide-eyed astonishment as Rostova explained, omitting the details of the spool, but painting a clear picture of a vanquished, automated defense system and the prize it had been guarding, a fleet of perfectly preserved, high-tech vessels. A deal was struck, not for a rescue, but for a partnership. The crew of the Sledgehammer had the knowledge and the access codes to the dead ships. The crew of the Rust Bucket had the equipment to begin the largest, most dangerous, and most profitable salvage operation in galactic history. Months turned into years. The Kelvin Nebula became the center of a new, undeclared power in the Outer Rim. Under the joint leadership of Rostova and Maeve, a ghost fleet was brought back to life, not as weapons of the silence, but as the foundation of a new society of outcasts and survivors. They stripped the warships for parts, turning the graveyard into a thriving, hidden shipyard and a sanctuary for those who had no love for the sterile order of the core worlds. The Sledgehammer, too broken to ever fly again, was their capital, their home. They anchored it to a massive, dormant asteroid, its scarred hull a monument to their impossible victory. Rostova never returned to fleet space. Her name, and that of her ship, faded into a heavily redacted file, a ghost story told by intelligence officers. But in the lawless sectors of the Rim, a different legend grew. They spoke of a ghost captain who commanded a fleet of resurrected ships, a woman who had faced the end of the universe and cut a deal. They said she was building a new nation in a place the rest of the galaxy was too afraid to go. Standing on the cold, silent bridge of her stationary ship, looking out at the bustling new civilization she had helped build among the ghosts, Eva Rostova knew she had finally found her purpose. She wasn't a fleet captain or a salvage operator anymore. She was a guardian of the forgotten, a queen in a kingdom of scrap and starlight. She and her crew hadn't just survived the silence. They had inherited it, and in its depths, they had finally, truly, found their home.